As Donald Trump presents what he calls a final offer for peace in Russia-Ukraine war, tensions spike across Kiev, Moscow, and Washington. The U.S. proposal offers de facto recognition of Russian control over Crimea and eastern Ukraine. In return, Ukraine would receive security guarantees and economic promises. Kiev has firmly rejected the plan, calling it unfair and incompatible with its constitution. Meanwhile, the Kremlin expresses willingness to freeze front lines but rejects Western peacekeepers. In London, downgraded talks signal growing diplomatic uncertainty. Trump accuses Zelensky of prolonging the war and threatens to pull the U.S. out of negotiations. Will this plan end the war? Is the U.S. really making a final attempt to fulfill its promises to end the war? And if not succeeded, Trump, will he withdraw from talks? Welcome to In Depth. According to the New York Times, U.S. President Donald Trump is pressuring Ukraine to accept a peace deal proposal that Ukraine sees as favoring Russia, recognizing territories Moscow has seized in the war, including Crimea. The plan, which Ukraine has firmly rejected, offers Kiev what they called vague security guarantees and says Ukraine will not be a member of NATO. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky called the proposal unconstitutional and reaffirmed that Crimea remains Ukrainian territory. Trump responded by accusing Zelensky of prolonging the war and implied that Putin was ready to make peace if not for Ukrainian resistance. Vice President J.D. Vance warned that the U.S. would withdraw from the peace process if both sides did not agree to the American terms. Meanwhile, Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Trump's envoy Steve Witkoff skipped peace talks in London, deepening concerns that the U.S. is sidelining Ukraine and its European partners, according to the New York Times. The newspaper added that despite mounting pressure, Kiev maintains its position. Peace cannot come at the cost of sovereignty or territorial integrity. Trump pushes a final offer to end the Russia-Ukraine war. The proposal recognizes Crimea and other key territories as Russian, while Kiev rejects it. Washington says it may walk away from negotiations if the two sides are unable to reach a resolution.
A major shift in the Russia-Ukraine war. U.S. President Donald Trump unveils a peace proposal that recognizes Crimea as part of Russia and accepts Russian control over other territories. The message from Washington is clear. This is the final offer. Trump's plan includes security guarantees for Ukraine, offered not by the United States, but by an unnamed group of European countries. Ukraine would lose NATO prospects, but might join the EU. Meanwhile, Russia would gain the lifting of sanctions and expanded economic cooperation. Kiev has rejected the proposal, calling it biased and vague. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said, recognizing Crimea as Russian is against Ukraine's constitution and unacceptable. While Trump accuses Zelensky of blocking peace, Putin signals readiness to freeze the front lines and begin negotiations. But Russia refuses European peacekeepers on Ukrainian soil. Meanwhile, in London, high-level peace talks were suddenly postponed after the U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio cancelled. As talks continue, the world watches the next steps. Will Ukraine be pressured into accepting the deal, leading to an end to the 3-year war? Or will Washington walk away from negotiations while the war rages on?
For more analysis, we're joined from Pennsylvania by Mr. Malik Francis, member of the American Republican Party, and from Kiev by Mr. Ivan Qnews, advisor of the Ukraine National Center. Good afternoon, both gentlemen, and welcome to In Depth. Mr. Francis, let me here start by you. And Trump called the recognition of Crimea as Russian, not even a point of discussion, and lashed out at Zelensky. Now, how does this stance reshape the U.S. position on the Russia-Ukraine war?
Good morning to you and to your guest. Unfortunately, as we talked in the past, that President Trump is not a peacemaker. A peacemaker does not favor one side against the others, does not pressure one side to give up territory. He's not aware of the Ukrainian constitution. President Zelensky cannot cede any feet from Ukrainian territory to Russia. Secondly, we cannot reward the aggressor and be against the victim. Secondly, I think according to the Ukrainian constitution, you need a referendum in order to cede a portion of the country. It's not going to happen. And I feel sorry for President Zelensky because he's respected by neither by President Trump nor by President Putin. So we have a problem here. And as I said, our president, good president, unfortunately, in Washington, he has been a bully. You cannot be a bully to bring peace. A peacemaker should be. And Trump is neither. And here is the problem. And unfortunately, the war will continue as long as Europeans keep sending arms to Ukraine, and Russia will not stop attacking Ukraine, and it may take more territory in the future.
Right, Mr. Qnews, the Ukrainian president has called any recognition of Crimea as Russian unconstitutional, rather constitutional impossibility. What domestic and legal constraints prevent Kiev from comprising on Crimea regardless of the US pressure?
Agree to studio guest and audience. First of all, it's a big mistake to say that it's the main problem President Zelensky. President Zelensky expressed the opinion of vast majority of Ukrainian people. Ukrainian people against of sacrificing by our territory. I absolutely agree with guests from the United States that we could not say that we can sacrifice by the victim, saying that, okay, that happened what happened, so let's start everything from with a new page. It's impossible because Russia started aggression. Russia in 2014 started the war, and when actually Russia controlled Crimea, because we understand that since 2014 till 2022, Russia has a control over Crimea. Yes, it was not recognized, but it was under their control. But it's not stop Russia to widen their territory. It means that if we now recognize Crimea as a part of Russia, it will be not the end of the story. It will be only start of the count till the next war, because Russia don't plan to stop its war. Russia plan to increase its production of weapons, and of course to do actually next war can happen in the nearest future. It means several years or even less than several years, because different focus say about that. So that's why now Ukraine, as we stated from the beginning, we are not ready to recognize any part of Ukraine acted by Russia. We are not ready to say that the aggressor receive a price of that recognition, because it means that everyone in the world can and be sure that after some period of time, whole world said, okay, no problem, recognize that it's your territory. It will be big motivation to every country in this world to start aggression against other countries. So I think that the world that was created after the Second World War on the principles of territorial integrity of the countries actually should defend this principle, and we should not violate it. Unfortunately, Russia decided to violate these rules, and any crime committed by any country should receive a punishment. The attempt to recognize Crimea as Russia means that this Russian crime will be avoid of punishment. So everyone say, okay, let's forget about this crime. It will be not correct for the future of our world. That's why Ukraine say no, we are not ready for this. Furthermore, understanding that Russia don't need some part of Ukraine. Russia need whole Ukraine, and the fact that they control Crimea from 2014 till 2022 doesn't stop it from attack to whole Ukraine. If they fail at capturing whole Ukraine, they succeed only in south part of Ukraine and some part of Donbas. That's why they said, let's recognize this part that we control as our country. Let's give a prize to aggressor, actually, and after that, there will be peace. But as 2014 and Minsk agreement demonstrated, that was not peace. That was only pause till next. So now Russia needs this. Thank you.
You raised a very important point, which is the 2014 agreement. And there was kind of reciprocal terms that were put there. We'll get back to this point, Mr. Yus, but let me go to Mr. Francis. And Mr. Francis, Vice President J.D. Vance warned Ukraine that Washington would walk away if the peace plan isn't accepted. Do you think the U.S. might abandon its long-held commitment to Ukraine and also Trump's promise to end the war in this second term?
Yes, President Trump, during his presidential campaign, promised to solve it in 24 hours. It's been a few months now, and he did not succeed because he's taking sides. The aggressor against the victim, and by favoring the aggressor, you cannot bring peace. And the victims here are the Ukrainian peoples who have been killed by Russia. At the same time, there are Russians who have been killed. It's not good, as we all know, and it's affecting the world community because it's getting too expensive to go to a store anywhere in Europe. So peace is the only solution, but we need a peacemaker, and Trump cannot be a peacemaker. His vice president is speaking his boss's language. He cannot threaten to leave because they need the natural resources of the Ukraine. Here they see money, big money will be getting out of the Ukraine, and I'm against it because natural resources of the Ukraine belong to the Ukrainian people, and the money is needed later on to rebuild Ukraine. And this is unacceptable and unethical. But unfortunately, I think President Zelensky promised President Trump that he will allow him or allow American companies to come to the Ukraine and maybe get the natural resources out of the Ukraine. And this is, it should be illegal. And as your guest said, yes, unfortunately, there is no justice in this world. Russia should be punished because Russia is the aggressor. As in Gaza, Israel should be punished, but unfortunately, United Nations is unable to enforce international laws, and no one is there to enforce it. And unfortunately, really, you see people getting killed because the greed of the Soviet Union. And as your guest said, yes, nobody could stop Putin. After the Ukraine, where is he going to go? He has a dream to revive the Soviet Union. This one will never succeed because I don't think the Soviet Union to be reborn again. As you have the Israeli have their big dream, Greater Israel, Erdogan in Turkey want to revive the Ottoman Empire. We have to be real here. We have to work together. It is only one community. We cannot keep killing each other because of a piece of land. Our children are starved to death, and no one is hearing their cries. The world had closed its ears and its eyes to the suffering of the people in the Ukraine, in Russia, in Gaza, in Sudan, and in Syria and Lebanon. Enough is enough. But unfortunately, we don't have a leader, an international leader that could be a peacemaker to bring peace. In Europe, we have no one, unfortunately, strong enough and smart enough to bring both sides together. In order to bring both sides, you cannot favor one against the other. Come to the table and everything should be negotiated. But to give the Crimea or other states to the Russians for its invasion as a reward it's unacceptable, and I don't think there'll be peace in that part of the world if Russia continue to occupy the Ukraine, the Crimea, and other states.
Right, but Crimea itself has its own case, and let me here go to Mr. Us. And Mr. Us, before the 2014 agreement, Crimea was part of Russia. Russia gave it back to Ukraine on terms that Ukraine would not join the NATO and would not allow the NATO to put any of the missiles or ballistic missiles on borders. It would be demilitarized. Now, Mr. Us, Ukraine's leadership described the US plan as constructive, but also biased and vague. Now, can Ukraine afford to reject the deal outright, or do you think there is room for compromise here?
Of course, it's hard to find compromise because Russia wants to destroy Ukraine. We understand that. Even this night, it was a terrible night for Kyiv. 10 persons reported to be murdered in the residential buildings when Russia attacked not military targets, it's attacked residential building and in Kyiv and other cities too. That's why we have, for Ukraine, it's clear. The Russian target really to rebuild USSR. I was sure in 2022 that the main purpose of Putin was to rebuild USSR. He said several years ago that the main geopolitical tragedy of previous century, it's top of the history of USSR, split of USSR, but it was logical due to events that time. Now, of course, Putin want to really rebuild it. He failed to do that in a short period of time, but he's sure that he can do that in next few years. But if in March 2022 Russian soldiers stay near Kiev where I live now, in March 2025 Russian soldiers was glad that they sent Ukraine out of their Kursk region. That's why I'm not sure what will happen in the next 3 years. Probably Russia will be glad that Ukraine failed to capture Moscow. Of course, I'm a big dreamer, nevertheless, who knows will be. About Crimea. Crimea, it's a really very hard point in the geographic map because, the problem of Crimea that it's a very important peninsula that historically is not belong both to Ukraine or Russia. Crimea is a Crimean Tatar land. It's the only native population of this peninsula. It's a nation very close to Turkey. That's why Turkey always support Crimean Tatars. And as Crimean Tatars support Ukraine in this war for Crimean Peninsula, they understand that for them it's better to live under Ukraine than under Russia. Of course, Turkey support Ukraine in this way. That's why I'm not sure that not only Ukraine will not recognize Crimea as a Russian one. Turkey also not recognized it because historically Ottoman Empire and Russian Empire has a lot of wars during their history, and of them was for the destiny of Crimea Peninsula. And Crimea became the part of Ukrainian, that time Social Soviet Republic, not after the split of USSR, but in the 1964. It was the moment when that time, 1956, when Nikita Khrushchev, the time leader of USSR, understands that it's better to give Crimea to Ukraine. There are a lot of conspiracy about this decision. One of the versions that in 2023, at that time Soviet leader Lenin asked for $20 million from Rockefeller and his partners instead of Crimea. He loaned Crimea for 20 years, but in 1943, when Soviet Union should return Crimea to USSR, they, of course, due to Second World War, decided not to do that. That's why they decided to create a cheat plan where Crimea from Russia gives to Ukraine, and that's why Russia should not give it to actually to Rockefeller and shareholders of the time company. It's a hard story. Nevertheless, I want to say that Crimea appeared since 1956 in Ukrainian hands, and after 1991, after split of Ukraine, Russia was not convinced of the fact that Crimea will be in Ukraine. They could do that, but decided no, let it be Ukraine. So that's why it was Russian decision in 1991. Now, of course, for Putin, it's very important to control Crimea. But when Putin said that he don't want to see widening of NATO, one of the main arguments, my first question, after Russian full-scale war in 2022, two countries bordering with Russia, first of all, Finland, with 1,273 kilometers land border, become the NATO members. So Putin action led to widening of NATO, and Putin have nothing against that idea. So probably NATO is not a problem for Putin. Putin want to rebuild USSR, that's why he starts this war. And NATO is just an argument that he used, but it's not a real argument for him. So that's why I don't think that when we're using NATO as an argument of starting this war, I don't think that is correct. The only argument is imperial ambitions of President Putin, who want to rebuild USSR, and then to rebuild the Soviet Union zone of influence, including Central European countries like Baltic countries, like Hungary, Slovakia, Czech, Romania, Bulgaria. That's what he wants, and yes, he failed in that, but some of our European partners understand that. Unfortunately, not all. That's why we are not receiving full-scale support from them. But we are working, Ukraine working on the fact that European will be more engaged in support of Ukraine in this very hard to our country war. Thank you.
Indeed, Mr. Yuas, you have spoken about history, and history has long history about this very particular part, and definitely different narrative or different stories from different sides. Anyway, what we were speaking about is, would Ukraine afford to reject the deal outright, or do you think there is room for compromise? That was the question.
So as for deal,
I'll get back to you reiterating the same question. Let me here go to Mr. Francis. The U.S. plan offers Russia tangible rewards, sanctions relief, economic partnership, and de facto territorial gains, while Ukraine receives vague promises, according to Zelensky. Now, how do we interpret this shift in the U.S. policy?
Now, President Biden was supporting the Ukraine against Russia, Vladimir Putin. Unfortunately, as we know, that President Trump is a friend of President Putin, and he's trying to help him out. And this is not really in favor of a peace treaty between the Ukraine and Russia. The people are suffering, are getting killed every day. We cannot afford to have more people getting killed for no reason anymore. Yes, the Soviet Union wants to keep Crimea. Maybe it's a good idea if both of them agree that Crimea should be an independent state, and both the Ukraine and Russia will recognize it with the international community. It may solve the question, maybe, but that's up to the Ukrainian and to the Russians. We cannot decide for either one. Unfortunately, President Trump has been deciding for the Ukrainian government and Ukrainian people, and this is unacceptable for a person to be a peacemaker. Yes, the Ukraine will not be allowed to join NATO. Everybody agrees. It's not going to happen, unfortunately. Secondly, all Russia cares about now is lifting the embargo and the sanction, and to restore diplomatic relationship with the United States, because the Russian economy is deteriorating every day, and Russia needs the embargo to be lifted. Secondly, here, I believe the only one, maybe, in my opinion, that the Chinese President Xi, maybe will be able to bring peace between the Ukraine and Russia, because he is a very intelligent man, he's very diplomatic, and he is fair and will not take sides. Now, he's taking sides with Russia, but I think if he's a peacemaker and he will try to bring both sides together, I believe he will have a chance to bring peace to that part of the world.
All right, so that was Mr. Malik Francis, member of the American Republican Party, and Mr. Ivan Yus, advisor at the Ukrainian National Center. We thank you both, gentlemen, for your valuable insights. And I guess that concludes this episode of In Depth. Many thanks for watching. Until next time, and stay tuned for more updates on Qnews.